An American music school can be very different from a European music school because they have a tradition to withhold and they have a tradition to uphold. But the fact is that for us, we can continue on, we can expand to other types of music.
Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to the second season of Art Restart, where we explore how artists are reinventing their fields and building a new landscape for the arts. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, brought to you by the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. I'm delighted to open this season of Art Restart with composer Sahba Aminikia. Sahba is an Iranian-American composer, musician, and educator based in San Francisco, whose own musical training spanned 3 continents. He first studied composition in the city of his birth, Tehran, and then relocated to Russia to attend the St. Petersburg State Conservatory. After emigrating as a refugee to San Francisco in 2006, Sahba then earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in music at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. His passion for blending genres and cultural influences in his work quickly garnered attention from musicians and ensembles all over the world. Among the performing groups to have commissioned him are Kronos Quartet, Brooklyn Youth Chorus, and Symphony Parnassus, and his compositions have been performed all over the world. Sahba is also the founder and artistic director of the annual Flying Carpet Children Festival that since 2018 has been bringing music and world-class musicians, as well as circus arts, to the Turkish border city of Mardin to engage and delight refugee children from Iraq and Syria. The music you're currently hearing is titled House of Circus, composed by Sahba. It is performed by Minnesota Philharmonic Orchestra, which also commissioned the piece. Sahba spoke to me from his home in San Francisco, having recently returned from Mardin, where he oversaw and took part in this year's festival, the first in person since the pandemic. I asked him if, as he was studying to be a musician, he had a career goal in mind.
Not really. Even now, I don't really. The reality is that at the time I started learning the piano from a very young age, since I was 9. And I was always this kind of mischief, this kind of character that I was not a good pianist. I was horrible at my piano classes because I cannot concentrate, the way pianists do on the Mozart piece, on a Bach piece. But I could improvise. I still can improvise for hours on piano. So that's how I started. I started improvising on piano, and I had a small melodica also as a child. So that's where my musicianship starts. But I was kind of discovered by this incredible teacher in Iran, Mr. Rehran Rohani, who himself was a Baha'i professor, and he was fired from the university, and he was teaching from his home in Tehran. And he had a gigantic collection of records in his room. I went to him originally as a piano student, but he realized that I'm more talented on the composition side. So he started giving me composition lessons actually in that room.
My next question is, what would you say is your mission today and what happened to change it? But you say you don't have a mission still.
I still look at music as a game, and I enjoy playing music and enjoy composing music. The next step I usually don't think about, because I think good music is produced that way, actually, when you're still enjoying the joy of music instead of looking at it as a career, as a job. And I've been lucky also throughout the way, I should mention this, that maybe this joy comes from privilege as well, because I've been lucky that since I arrived in the US and I started studying at the Conservatory of Music, I've been blessed with many commissions. I've been working. My life has been provided basically through this job,
Well, it sounds like your talent has earned it. But I want to go back to your saying that music is, the way you think about music is as a game, and that you can't think of it primarily as a career. you've also taught many students, correct?
Yes, I did.
So, how do you impart that particular knowledge to them?
I'm a very flexible teacher. And my so right now I used to teach at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. And after I started the festival, I quit that job. I now just work as a freelance composer, but I also teach at the Baha'i University now. I teach basically two classes, one counterpoint and one orchestration. My classes are pretty flexible. We listen to music. I don't grade students, and they love it because I just hate giving numbers and alphabet letters to people and evaluate them that way. Because at the end of the day, I'm not providing much, through the online means. What I try to invoke in my teachers is just to be aware of that. At the end of the day, this is a way of living, and it's not the type of education that you can receive and you graduate and you go find a job. This is the music is solely should be enough, and playing music and composing music, in my opinion, is a privilege. In fact.
So, the Baha'i University still takes place in people's private homes in Tehran. Is that correct?
Actually, for the last couple of years, it's been, and due to the COVID-19 restrictions, now the university is entirely online, actually. And they have several teachers from all around the world teaching. And I've been privileged enough to be teaching at this school and be in touch with such amazing students.
But Baha'i students still can't get a higher education in Iran?
They cannot. No, they still cannot. Since the beginning of the Iranian Revolution in 1979, Baha'is have been systematically deprived of education and other social rights. And some of them have been given. For example, the right to have a passport has been given to Baha'is for the last 15 years or so. And before that, they were not able even to get out of the country. And they had to be smuggled into the neighbor countries and then become refugees and come to the West. But now you can have a passport, and the marriages were not registered at that time. Now they are registered, but the higher education situation still remains the same, and young people are systematically deprived of education.
Well, you mentioned the word refugee, which I think is a good segue into talking about your work on the Turkish border.
Of course.
And I wonder if you can describe how you came to the idea of the Flying Carpet Festival and how you developed it.
So basically, all this started in 2018, and due to the political hemisphere in America at that time, I was feeling the need to do something more real than I was doing. I mean, that is relative, but at the time I was feeling that I'm very much absorbed in the artistic community in the US, and I felt that a lot of that is kind of out of touch with reality. I was just hearing about people losing their home. Almost more than 20 million people have lost their home in Syria. I was very much, inspired to do something about this. I heard about this organization named Sirkane, or Har Yerde Sanat Darnegi, or Art Anywhere Association, that was active in southeast of Turkey. During a travel that I had to Izmir, when I was visiting my family in 2018, I actually took a one-day trip, very hesitantly, to this small city because it is in the red zone, and there are lots of conflicts happening because it's a border city, and it's very close to the border of Syria in Turkey. The founders of the organizations were kind enough to took this day off and show me around the whole organization. They showed me the street centers they had at the time. This was a decision that was not really made by me at the time. It was inevitable, actually, to accept to do something. I wanted to be part of them. They were originally looking for a music instructor, but when we met, they talked to me about this idea of a festival because they've been running several festivals, music festivals, circus festivals before, and they wanted to kind of combine that, consolidate that into one festival. And on the same day at night, with one of the founders of the organization, Pinar Demiral, we sat together and we wrote an application for a grant from the US Embassy in Adana. And this was a grand competition, and our Flying Carpet Festival won that competition, in fact, and we received the grant to initiate this project in the city of Mardin and the surrounding cities.
And so this was in 2018. You've had how many festivals since?
We've had 3 festivals. In 2020, due to the COVID restrictions, we were unable to have any public gathering in that part of the world. Basically, the last year was 2021, and I basically just came from it. It was in October, between October 1st and October 10th.
How do you think your artistry informs your philanthropic work, your artist spirit?
In fact, I have to tell you that I don't really call it philanthropic work. I call it social work. And I think, in fact, it is part of my artistry. My music is very much is informed by political and social dilemmas in the world and conflicts all over, both in Iran and the other countries that I've encountered. And for example,
Was this always the case?
it was the case. Back in 2017, for example, I composed a piece, a 25-minute choral piece for Kronos Quartet and San Francisco Girls Chorus. And we collaborated with Afghanistan National Institute of Music Children Choir, which is the first music school ever founded in Afghanistan. And it was founded in 2010. I also created other pieces regarding women's voices in Iran, because women are systematically, again, deprived of singing in public. So I collaborated over 3 pieces. I collaborated with several singers in Iran, and either it was performed by Kronos Quartet or we performed with other ensembles. This is something that I cannot separate myself from. I am a child of revolution. I was raised right after the revolution in 1980s, where the society, Iranian society, was at the most ideological, point in the history. And in fact, both in Baha'i community and both in the, in the political realm of Iran at that time, we were constantly exposed to incidents happening, and these incidents kind of always informed my pieces and my music along the way. This is, in fact, not a choice, but something that I am born with, in fact.
If you don't mind me asking, what do you mean by incidents?
Well, for example, coming from a Baha'i family, many of my father's friends, they've been either jailed or executed. And I grew up with a large number of friends, family friends, that none of them had a father. And my father, in fact, was a father to them because of this friendship that he had with their fathers. And I grew up around them. So the pain they were enduring was kind of part of my life as well. I remember as a child, when we go to their houses, my mother would advise me actually not to hug my father too much, because all these children were deprived of that, privilege that I had. So I was, as a child, even I had to always be considerate and be sensitive to their emotions and what happened in their lives.
So since you've been working with Flying Carpet Music Festival and teaching and working with those refugee children, how has that impacted your art?
In many ways, it brought me more to the performance side of music, which I love very much. And before that, I was mostly involved with creating music and creating PDF files and sending it to people. But now I'm very much performing, in every festival. And I also have created this on a parallel level. I have created this basically school of thought in that festival around improvisation. And this came out of need, because the artists that we bring there and the logistics and everything dictates that we don't have much time in order to prepare for the festival. So performers should rely on improvisation a lot. And I usually hold, for example, a 2-day rehearsal, and we mostly meditate together, and I kind of teach improvisation to Western classical musicians who have extraordinary skills in performing, but they cannot improvise that much. So this is something that I vividly see that has impacted my work. And I had also the privilege of meeting a lot of local musicians in the Mardin area. And this area is one of the most ancient areas in the world. And I've been privileged to be working with a lot of, for example, Dangbej singers who are coming from this Kurdish tradition of singing that is called Dangbej. And they're basically troubadours. They travel from one part of the region to another, and they sing Kurdish songs which include stories inside of them. So this definitely this project has exposed me to a different array of musicians, and I've been privileged enough to be working with them, leading kind of a chamber orchestra with them. And it's funny, it has happened to us that in the middle of the musicians we work with, the local musicians are mostly musicians by heart, you know. So it's happened in the middle of the performance, the singer would start to sing completely another song that we have never rehearsed, and we all have to adjust right in that moment and start playing with him, you know. So this way of spontaneous response to music is something that I can tell you has been invoked by this festival and this project.
And so a lot of the Western musicians who come to the festival basically have to learn this skill, it sounds like.
It does, but in fact, it's not a skill. It is, in fact, I would call it more of a spiritual liberation because they are already amazing performers. They already have a strong intuition, strong musicianship, and they are simply afraid of improvisation. I release something in them that they would be, inclined to actually to respond musically and out of heart. So separating a little bit, taking a break a little bit from the music of the mind, and bringing themselves back to music of the heart, which is, I think, it's a joyful event, you know, in any musician's life.
What are your hopes for the students you're teaching at Baha'i University? What do you think is their prospect as Iranian musicians?
Yes, I'm not really huge about them living in Iran and immigrating to another country, in spite the fact that that's something they're constantly advised. I think that people should live a musical life, no matter what they end up with. Because even at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, I can say a large percentage of the students after graduating, they're not musicians anymore. They work in offices and they work in administration and they have other jobs. So I think the musical education is in fact part of a spiritual education. And I feel these students, they should really strengthen that part of themselves, no matter where they're going to end up. And of course, if they want to study music further, they have to get out of Iran. That is an inevitable fact. But I don't necessarily encourage them to do that. And I still believe in this day and age, with the emergence of digital media and everything, anyone can be anywhere and they can still produce amazing material.
I love what you just said, that many of your students don't go into music, but their musical training gives them a spiritual footing in a way. Are there other teachers who share that teaching, or are you the only one? Because I feel like conservatories really train young students to be professionals, and if they don't, quote unquote, make it, they're failures. So it seems like there's an alternative here.
I think that's a very American way of looking at music. In fact, in that sense, every music school in the country is a scam, because there is no prospect job waiting for these students. And the fact that such students with such skills come out of schools and they feel as a failure, I think that's something to be discussed, you know, academically. But institutions today, I don't think they have the time to do that. And they are mostly concerned about creating almost an imaginary image of a prospect and a career for students, which really does not exist. Classical music is at a very vain point, and there are certain reasons for that. Flying Carpet was, in fact, partially was for students who feel that way, the young people who came out of conservatories or music schools here in the US, and they feel that if they don't get a job at some symphony that they might hate later, they are a failure. And that's just not right to me, in fact, you know, because many of my friends who are employed and hired by these orchestras, they have to sit all day on a chair and play some music that they might not like, you know. And they do that for tens of years just because of the security. It's also the same about academic jobs. In fact, I myself, I'm not really interested in academic career because of that. In fact, because I don't think that a musician should come out of school and start teaching the same thing that he has been taught to other students immediately. I don't think they're ready for that. But it seems like the job market is going that way. As a composer, I was expected to get a DMA and be immediately applying for academic jobs. And that's something I was not interested in. I was just simply not interested in it. I love interacting with people. I love the impact that music has on normal people. And I wanted to observe that throughout my career.
So, and this podcast, we like to talk a lot about reinventing systems that no longer work in the arts. And I think one system you brought up is an educational system that is teaching students to look forward to a career that may no longer exist. If you could create your own music school, let's say a flying carpet school for gifted musical students here in America, what would it look like?
First of all, I would love them to be exposed to every genre of music and music from other parts of the world. That is, I think, the first issue, that we are mainly in music schools are concentrated on the music from 6 Western European countries. And that, in fact, is an old phenomenon, and needs to change and will change at some point. But now doesn't seem to be the time. But the fact is that the music coming from every culture is as precious to them as it is classical music to the Western civilization. And there are advantage points, to every type of music that exists in the world right now. For example, in classical music, I teach counterpoint, and I'm very aware that counterpoint has been always a skill that a classical Western musician can be proud of, and the more efficient and the more proficient they become, the music would sound more elaborate. It's an achievement for Western classical music. But in fact, this is just one perspective of looking to music out of thousands of ways. For example, in Iranian classical music, there is so much emphasis on melody making and improvisation on melodies. I personally believe strongly in melodies, and I feel that music exists because of melodies. And melodies are, in fact, stories from the past and that are being passed to us, and we are kind of obligated to actually to embed them and into promoting them, because they are the stories of other people from the past, and we are just part of that past. So I feel that, for example, this is one way of looking at music. In Iranian music, there is so much emphasis on melodies, and being able to improvise on a small motif or a small portion of a melody for hours. And that is definitely a skill that doesn't exist and is not encouraged in the classical music scene or the classical music school. So as a nation that we are made out of several cultures, hundreds of cultures, and hundreds of different ways of looking at music. Why are we so concerned about these 5 countries? This is something I still don't understand. I think an American music school can be very different from a European music school because they have a tradition to withhold and they have a tradition to uphold. But the fact is that for us, we can continue on. We can expand to other types of music. It's an idealistic idea, but for example, I think why a symphony where classical music is being performed, why doesn't it include classical music from every country in the world? Why should it be just 5 European countries that we are so much focused on? I think these are just colonial effects that has remained from the old times, and no one has thought of changing them because they are so strong. But in a society like us that is so diverse, and there is so little support for music, for serious music, for art music, I think we should expand to the music of other nations, and this brings a lot of support from other communities that they have lived and existed in this country for centuries, some of them.
Have you ever been tempted to curate your own event or even had your own institution here?
I've been thinking about it recently. I
Oh,
can
you
tell you,
have? Oh,
I can
tell
tell you the
me.
festival has been taking a lot of time. I mean, the last
Right.
4 years, I've been trying to establish something here, and you have to realize also these institutions, they run mostly out of endowments and large investments that have been made. So it is first of all difficult to compete or bring anything, to this, pots basically out of what I'm trying to create actually here. But I've been thinking about it, and I've been thinking how to first of all starting from where people enjoy the music. That should be somewhere that appeals to the masses, to the people that everyone would enjoy. So I'm thinking of social programs. I'm thinking of how to curate, my own type of music here. But it also needs this kind of endeavor, needs support from existing institutions, because they have almost all the means that is necessary to create such event. But as a composer, instead of curating, I've been composing the music that I love to hear. So it's kind of narcissistic to say, but in fact I think it's true about every composer, that they write the type of music they want to hear. And I've been trying to do this. I've been trying to break any stereotypes that exist about an like Iranian immigrant musician here. I've been trying to embed the culture more inside of the American culture and what already exists here. I'm working on a long piece right now, almost 50-minute piece about Rumi, actually. And the piece is commissioned by a choir Verdigris ensemble in Dallas, actually. And so this is, I took that as an amazing opportunity, because we are working in part of the country that is in need of actually this kind of diversity in culture. And I'm trying to bring both the English translation and the original words of Rumi into this area. I think poetry is the way to reconcile and bring people together and gather them around an individual idea.
I was going to ask you what upcoming project you're most excited about, but I think I just heard it.
You got it.
If you'd like to learn more about Sahba and read a longer version of this interview, please visit uncsa.edu/artrestart. Be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified of each new episode. We're bringing you some wonderful interviews in the coming months. Special thanks to Sahba and to Brian Dowdy, the artistic director and conductor of Minnesota Philharmonic Orchestra, for allowing us to use House of Circus in this episode. Thanks as well to past Art Restart guest Sarah Cahill. Be sure to check out her episode if you haven't already. The video for House of Circus, or Circane, features some of the young circus art performers from the Flying Carpet Festival and was directed by Pinar Demaral, the founder of Circane, whom Sahba mentioned in the interview. The link to the video is in our show notes. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Kenan Institute for the Arts, thanks so much for listening.